Afflictions of the mind. In the last chapter, we learned how our thoughts can make us either happy or sad. These thoughts pour forth in a constant stream. Let us say that it's the weekend and we glance outside. We see that a nice summer day is ahead of us. We happily recall our plans to take a pleasant hike in the woods with some friends. Then a thought about layoffs in the next few months at work pops into our mind, and we sink into a gloomy mood. Thoughts of doubt and fear rush through our mind and occupy us for several minutes. Finally, we put the matter out of our mind and another thought pops up unexpectedly. We forgot to go to the store yesterday to pick up bread for breakfast. Do we have time? Yes, just enough. So we dash out of the door to go to the store. On the way, multitudes of thoughts run through our mind. The road has a pothole. The driver in front is too slow. Is there anything else to get from the store? And so it goes on and on, incessantly, day after day, thought after thought after thought. One guru called his disciples around him. He related a hilarious joke that made them all laugh. The guru then proceeded to relate the same anecdote again. This time, some sniggered while others smiled politely. But the guru did not stop there. He went on to repeat the same joke before them. This time they could only manage a sheepish grin. Not to be discouraged, he related the anecdote once again. Now one of the students could not restrain herself anymore. She said, "Gurudev, your joke has become very boring. You have already repeated it 4 times. The Guru replied, "If you get bored listening to a hilarious joke again and again, then why do you go on recalling thoughts of fear, misery, and hurt in your mind? Is there any way to control the constant flow of thoughts within us? The subtle machine inside that generates thoughts is the mind, and hence the key to controlling and managing thoughts will come with a deeper understanding of the functioning of the mind." Theories about the mind. How does the mind function, and what is its correlation to the behavioral traits of people? Psychology is a branch of human knowledge that attempts to analyze the science of the mind and behavior by establishing general principles and researching specific cases. It is recognized as an academic discipline as well as an applied science. Allied to it are branches of psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, psychodynamics, psychiatry, and many more. Some of the more popular branches of psychology are shared here. Psychoanalysis. It was Sigmund Freud who first made Western psychology famous. Freud, better known as father of psychoanalysis, was the first to introduce the concept of an unconscious mind. At the end of the 19th century, he presented his theory of psychoanalysis in Austria. Psychoanalysis is the study of the theories and therapeutic techniques that aim to explore and cure the unconscious mind. According to the Freudian psychoanalysis, the human psyche comprises of ID, ego, and superego. The ID refers to the inherent drives we seek to fulfill because we believe that by doing so, we will be happier. The superego is our value system. It is partially learned in childhood and is partially an inherent value system. The ego is the mediator between the superego and ID and works on the reality principle, that is, it helps us determine which drives to act upon. Freud theorized that conflict between them results in disorders. Analytical psychology. This is the school of psychology founded by Carl Jung. Early in his career, Jung was a close associate of Freud. The two had a great rapport, and at one point, Freud considered Jung as his successor. However, Jung's ideas later began to diverge from Freud's, and the two broke away. There were two key points of contention between them. First one, Freud focused on the unconscious as a repository of negative emotions, while Jung considered the unconscious as collective and personal because he believed it contained memory and ideas inherited from ancestors. Second, Freud's theory focused on sexual development, while Jung focused on the collective unconscious or universal symbols that all can relate to. The primary goal of life, according to Jungian psychology, is the individuation of the self with both its conscious and unconscious aspects. The unconscious can be related to or understood via symbols seen in daily life, such as in dreams, art, religion, personal relationships, and so on. The process of bridging the conscious and the unconscious together leads to harmony. Obstacles or disruptions can result in disorders. Cognitive psychology. It is a field of psychology that aims to understand our higher level mental processes such as attention, creativity, language, memory, perception, problem solving, thinking, and their impact on behavior. Among other things, these processes involve the use of sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. The process of language acquisition, the impact of language on mood and behavior, and other related topics are helping researchers identify learning disabilities at an early age. The studies on attention and memory have led to significant gains in treating attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. With such relevant topics and backed by scientific research, cognitive psychology quickly gained credibility and application. Other branches of psychology such as abnormal psychology, developmental psychology, and social psychology, and the fields of economics and linguistics draw heavily from cognitive psychology. Behaviorism. This branch of psychology disagrees with the psychoanalytical approach of introspection and focuses on how external environments impact behavior. B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning model accepted and acknowledged the role of thoughts and emotions as influencing one's behavior. This was in contrast to the previous theory of classical conditioning that focused only on external stimuli. Behaviorism, together with cognitive psychology, is widely used as cognitive behavior therapy (CBT) to treat disorders such as anxiety, depression, mood disorders, phobias, and post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD), among others. Humanistic psychology. While Carl Rogers is widely credited with the establishment of humanistic psychology, It was Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs that brought it to the forefront as a distinct branch. Psychologists affiliated with this branch emphasize human beings as more than the sum of their parts. As a result, instead of focusing on one mental affliction, they prefer to view the individual as a whole. According to Maslow, we all have basic psychological needs such as hunger, thirst, sex, and sleep, among other necessities. As these are fulfilled, safety and security needs of job security, safety of home, and so on start becoming important. As these needs are satisfied, the need for love and belonging starts gaining prominence. Beyond this is the need for achievement and respect. And lastly is the need for self-actualization, where one is working purely for the joy of it. Existential psychology. This branch of psychology is most concerned with fulfilling one's meaning in life. Essentially, it looks for universal principles that apply to all instead of isolating people or their behavioral patterns. Existential psychology lists the 4 dimensions of human life: physical, relationship to one's physical self, health and well-being, relationship with external environment; social, relationship with others; psychological, focus on one's attitude and experiences; and spiritual, relationship with the unknown or discovering the meaning of one's life in a more personal way. Viktor Frankl is one of the most famous existential psychologists who later broke away and developed a branch of therapy called logotherapy. Positive psychology. As recently as 1998, Martin Seligman formalized positive psychology as a valid branch of psychology. Together with Mihaly, he defined positive psychology as a scientific study of positive human functioning and flourishing on multiple levels that include the biological, personal, relational, institutional, cultural, and global dimensions of life. The basic premise here is to look to the future to live a happy and meaningful life. By doing so, one learns to focus on the positive. This is in stark contrast to other branches of psychology that focus on disorders of the mind. As you can see from the above, there is a plethora of perspectives on the functioning of the mind. These are helpful branches of psychology. However, truly meaningful and lasting improvements to the mind's activity cannot be accomplished without a profound comprehension of the mind in the context of all creation. In this book, we will learn the science of the mind and intellect as contained in the ancient Vedic texts. In this divine light, we will discover practical tools to use in everyday circumstances and situations. These tools will help us to not only lead a better life but also to fulfill the objective of our sojourn on planet Earth. The ancient science of Vedic psychology. Astonishingly, the science of mind was perfectly explained 5,000 years ago in the ancient Vedic scriptures. This science, which we can call Vedic psychology, describes the mind's working so clearly that in contrast, the empirical theories of modern psychology pale into insignificance. Vedic psychology is elaborated in great detail in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, along with other Vedic scriptures. These ancient texts have been greatly acclaimed by several famous Western scholars. To quote a few, "Whenever I have read any part of the Vedas, I have felt that a divine light illuminated me. In the great teaching of the Vedas, there is no touch of sectarianism. Henry David Thoreau, American writer and philosopher. When we read the philosophical monuments of the East, above all those of India, we discover in them many truths so highly elevated in contrast to which the European genius has stopped, that we are constrained to bend our knees before the philosophy of India. Victor Cousin, French philosopher. When I read the Bhagavad Gita and reflect about how God created this universe, everything else seems so superfluous. Albert Einstein, American scientist. There is nothing in this world as elevating as the Upanishads. They have been the solace of my life, and they shall be the solace of my death. Arthur Schopenhauer, German philosopher. If these words of Schopenhauer require any confirmation, I shall gladly give it as the result of my lifelong study of the Vedic scriptures. Professor Max Muller, German Orientalist. Eternal philosophical truth has seldom found a more striking and decisive expression than in the emancipating knowledge of the philosophy of the Upanishads. Paul Deussen, German Orientalist. Access to the Vedas is the greatest privilege this century may claim over previous centuries. J. Robert Oppenheimer, American nuclear physicist. The Bhagavad Gita is one of the clearest and most comprehensive summaries of the perennial philosophy ever to have been done. Aldous Huxley, English writer. Vedic psychology presents the origin and creation of mental afflictions in a systematic, scientific, and logical manner. It further teaches us the techniques for purification of the mind and the solution to problems of everyday life through improvement in our thinking. Let us embark on a thrilling journey on the pathways of Vedic psychology. I assure you that it could be the most rewarding journey of your life. But the subtle science requires an open mind, concentration, and dedication to understand it. Therefore, patiently read the logic enumerated here down to the last link, and you will find that all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle of the mind's functioning fall neatly into place. Diseases of the mind. We are familiar with bodily afflictions and their consequences. A single physical ailment has the capacity to ruin our entire day. It is not uncommon to hear people say that their back was aching or head was dizzy, and so they could do nothing throughout the day. However, physical ailments are not even fractionally as debilitating as mental ones. Sage Tulsidas states, even one physical ailment is enough to incapacitate us. Then think of the plight of the soul afflicted by numerous mental ailments. Is there a mean for relief? The Vedic scriptures refer to anger, envy, greed, desire, among other weaknesses as manas rog, mental illness. They afflict all of us as long as we are in the world of Maya. The problem is that we often do not even realize that we have a mental affliction. We know we get angry, and we are aware that we become envious as well. But we do not know that anger and envy are diseased conditions. Instead, we write them off as human nature or a natural tendency. And since we are unaware of their effect on our overall health and well-being, we do not try to cure them. These mental diseases are so overpowering that even government laws are unable to keep them in check. People know that violence can result in imprisonment, and yet, when angry, they do not hesitate to transgress the law. They know that the consumption of narcotics is illegal, but still, driven by desire, they remain addicted. Why? Why is it that we behave in ways that do us more harm than good? To answer this question, let us study the diseases of the mind one at a time. The disease of anger. One of the grossest mental afflictions is anger. When it arises, it disturbs our inner poise. It causes a rush of blood to the head. We often regret what we say or do when we are in a rage. Later, we wish that we had not become angry, and we wonder how we succumbed to it. The backlash of anger can remain inside us for much longer than the provocation that caused it. Roche was changing the puncture tire of his car that was parked outside his home. Unknown to him, his son had taken a sharp-edged stone and was etching graffiti on the other side of the car. After replacing the wheel, Roche walked around and discovered the damage that his 5-year-old son had done. Roche became livid with rage. He took the spanner in his hand and began beating his son mercilessly on his knuckles. Though the son screamed, Roche continued slamming his hand in his fit of fury. Later, Roche discovered that he had broken the fingers of his little boy. He rushed him to the hospital. The doctor examined the hand and said that a couple of fingers would have to be removed to avoid gangrene from growing on the dead mass. Roche was shattered at what he had done. After the surgery, when the little boy regained consciousness, he looked at his hand and asked innocently, "Father, when will my fingers grow back?" Roche broke down in tears. He returned home filled with remorse. In the driveway, his eyes fell on the graffiti on the car. His son had written, "I love you, Dad." The child had innocently expressed his love by scratching the car, but in his rage, Roche had behaved like a fiend. Such is the nature of anger. It makes us forget civility, good manners, and kindness. In its grip, humans forget basic respect, empathy, and compassion. Hence the Sanskrit saying, "Krodhat krodhe kathanute." Do not allow anger to overcome you. Rather, become angry upon anger itself. The question now before us is this: how can we overcome anger? Nobody wants to behave a slave of fury and allow the intellect to be deluded by it. Yet, when it attacks us, we forget and make the mistake of giving into it. Why does anger arise, and is there any permanent solution to overcome it? In order to answer this question, we first need to understand another mental affliction: the disease of greed. A second mental disease is greed for money, prestige, delicacies, luxurious objects, or anything else. Though people spend their whole life striving to satiate greed, it remains forever unfulfilled like a bottomless vessel. Unlike anger that reaches a peak and then subsides, greed never diminishes, and motivated by it, we burn out, as is seen in the rat race of the corporate world. Let me share a powerful story on this topic. A king was hunting alone in a dense forest when he lost his way. Wandering desperately, he reached the hut of a villager called Lobhiram, who gave him food, drink, and shelter for the night. The next morning, the king thanked him from the bottom of his heart and offered him the boon of his choice. Lobhiram said, "O king, yours is a large kingdom. Please grant me the boon that all the land I can measure with my horse from sunrise to sunset should be mine." The king, out of the gratitude to the villager, consented, "So be it." The next day, Lobhiram started off from outside the king's capital city. He had a good steed and he kept prodding it to gallop as fast as it could. By 10 o'clock in the morning, he had covered a huge terrain. The land would have sufficed for him and many generations of his progeny, but it was insufficient for his greed. By midday, both the rider and the horse were exhausted, and their throats were parched like leather. But Lobhiram's greed was ever fresh and yearning for more. Finally, in the late afternoon, the steed collapsed. Lobhiram was thrown off and crashed headlong into a boulder by the side of the road. He died on the spot. When nearby villagers came to bury Lobhiram, they exclaimed, "Alas, in the end, just these 2 yards of land alone were useful to him. All the rest was wasted." Such is the nature of greed. It drives us unforgivingly for fulfillment of desires, which never happens. The Garud Puran states, "A king wishes to be the emperor of the world. The emperor aspires to be a celestial god. A celestial god seeks to be Indra, the king of heaven, and Indra desires to be Brahma, the secondary creator. Yet the thirst for material enjoyment does not get satiated. The difference between our needs and our wants is created by greed. We do not need much to live a happy life, but greed creates innumerable wants for more wealth, higher posts, greater prestige, and bigger houses. The more we get, the more we want. Nothing seems to quell our discontentment. Imagine just how blissful life would be with the wealth of inner contentment that would come if we could free ourselves from greed. What is the origin of this greed and what is its cure? The answer to this question will become abundantly clear in just a little while. Read on patiently. The affliction of desire. Both anger and greed are severe afflictions of the mind. Yet, the Vedas say that these are both marginal. More perilous than even these is another disease. What is that? Desire. To want, long, or hope for something is kamana, desire. It is fundamentally of 5 kinds: the desire to see, the desire to hear, the desire to smell, the desire to taste, and the desire to touch. Together, these are called kam, lust, and refer to by one word, desire. How dangerous is desire? The Sukti Sudhakar states. This popular verse translates as follows: The deer loves music for the pleasure of the ear. It is enticed by the hunter, who plays melodious music and shoots the deer when it comes to hear it. The elephant loves the tactile enjoyment it gets from its skin. It is allured into the net by the female elephant and becomes easy prey for the waiting poacher. The moth lusts for the light to gratify its eyes. It is drawn to the flame and gets burned alive. The bee loves fragrance, for it gives pleasure to its nostrils. it refuses to fly off when the flower closes at sunset and gets trapped within. The fish, yearning for indulgence of its tongue, nibbles at the bait and ends up in the fisherman's frying pan. All these die in pursuit of the pleasure of one of the senses. What will happen to the human who is chasing all five objects of gratification? Desire is universally singled out in all the Vedic scriptures as a worst mental affliction. We may wonder why it is considered such a big culprit. In anger, people destroy life and property. In greed, they waste their whole life accumulating meaningless goods and posts they could easily live without. But in desire, they only hanker for gratification and indulgence. So, isn't it the desire relatively innocuous in comparison to anger and greed? No, it is not. For desire, it is a mother of anger and greed. Let us understand this in the following sections. Anger arises from desire. Let us understand the origin of anger through the following story. Chandu developed a deep desire to eat ice cream. He purchased 2 liters of chocolate chip from the local ice cream store and placed it in the freezer. Chandu then went for a walk in the sun to work up an appetite so that he could really enjoy the ice cream on his return. However, on coming back, he found that there was no ice cream in the refrigerator. "I had put a large pack of ice cream here," Chandu exclaimed. "Where did it go?" "My dear husband, do you not remember?" his wife commented nonchalantly. "The doctor had prescribed that you should limit your sugar intake. I have trashed the ice cream." "What? You threw the ice cream?" Chandu yelled. He became incensed with rage upon his wife. What was the cause for Chandu's outburst? He had created a desire and its fulfillment was obstructed by his wife. This led to the anger outburst. Therefore, anger comes not on its own, but from the obstruction of desire. Consider other examples. We grow angry when we want our family to concur with our views and they do not. We become angry when others refuse to follow our suggestions or instructions. Thus, desire is the mother and anger is its child. Sometimes people come to me saying, "Swamiji, everything is okay in me except for anger. You do not have any affliction apart from anger?" I ask, "No, Swamiji, anger is my only problem." Impossible. If anger is present, its cause, desire, must also be present. We have learned that the cause for anger is the obstruction of desire. Now let us determine the cause for greed. Greed also arises from desire. Let us go back to the example of Chandu and his wife. We had seen how when Chandu discovered his wife had trashed the ice cream he craved, he had become livid with rage. Now suppose the wife did not throw the ice cream. When Chandu returned, he began eating voraciously. Now ask him, "Did you enjoy the ice cream?" "Yes." "So, is your desire satiated forever?" "No, it is only satiated for today." He replies, "After 3 days, I will want it again." This example illustrates how fulfilling desire only extinguishes it for a brief moment. It then comes back with greater intensity. In this way, the fulfillment of desire is the cause of greed. The uncommonly known secret of this world is that desire can never be eliminated by satiating it. It is like attempting to extinguish a fire by pouring clarified butter on it. The fire does seem to go away, but only momentarily. It then flares up with redoubled vigor. Thus, like anger, greed is also the child of desire. The Ramayana states, if you satisfy desire, it results in greed. The Srimad Bhagavatam states, if one person was to get all the wealth, luxuries, and sensual objects in the world, that person's desire would still not be satiated. Hence, knowing it to be the cause of misery, an intelligent person should renounce desire. The Puranas relate a powerful story about how desires get inflamed. Saubhari was a great sage in ancient times. He is mentioned in the Rig Veda, where there is a mantra called Saubhari Sutra. There is also a scripture called the Saubhari Samhita. In other words, he was not just another hermit. Saubhari had attained such control over his body that he could submerge himself in the Yamuna and meditate underwater. One day, he saw two fish mating. This spectacle carried away his mind and senses, and the desire for sexual consummation arose in him. He abandoned his spiritual practice and came out of the water, wondering how to fulfill his desire. At that time, the king of Ayodhya was Mandhata, a very illustrious and noble ruler. He had 50 daughters, each more beautiful than the other. Saubhari approached the king and asked for the hand in marriage of one of the 50 princesses. King Mandhata wondered about the sanity of the sage and thought to himself, an old man wanting to get married? The king knew Saubhari to be a powerful sage and feared that if he refused, the sage might curse him. But if he consented, the life of one of his daughters would be ruined. He was in dilemma. As a way out of the predicament, he said, O Holy One, I have no objection to your request. Please take a seat. I shall bring my 50 daughters before you, and whosoever chooses you will become yours in marriage. The king was confident that none of his daughters would choose the old, and in this way he would be saved from the sage's curse. Saubhari was all too aware of king's intention. He told the king that he would return the following day. That evening, he used his yogic powers to turn himself into a handsome young man. Consequently, when he presented himself at the palace the next day, all the 50 princesses chose him as their husband. The king was bound by the word he had given and was compelled to marry all his daughters to the sage. Now the king was deeply concerned about how sage Saubhari could keep his 50 daughters happy. However, Saubhari again used his yogic powers. Putting the king's apprehension to rest, he assumed 50 forms, created 50 palaces for his wives, and lived separately with each of them. In this manner, thousands of years passed by. The Puranas state that Saubhari had many children from each of them, and those children had further children until a tiny city was created. One day, Saubhari came to his senses and exclaimed, Srimad Bhagavatam 9.6.50, O humans, those of you who make plans to attain happiness through material acquisitions, be careful. Look at my degradation. I used to sit in samadhi in the Yamuna. One desire arose, and to satiate it, I created 50 bodies by my yogic powers, living with 50 women for thousands of years, and yet the senses did not experience fulfillment. The only kept hankering for more. Learn from my downfall and be not fooled into thinking you will ever fulfill desire. Sobri realized he had been chasing a mirage. Worldly pleasures have also been called Mrigtrishna in the scriptures, which means like a mirage seen by the deer. The sun's rays reflecting on the hot desert sand create an illusion of water. The deer, fooled by the illusion, thinks there is water ahead of it and runs to quench its thirst. Its dull intellect cannot realize it is the victim of deception. The more it runs towards the water, the further the mirage recedes. The unfortunate deer keeps chasing the illusory water and finally dies of exhaustion. Likewise, material energy, Maya, too creates an illusion of happiness, and we run after that illusory happiness in the hope of quenching the thirst of our senses. But no matter how much we try, happiness recedes from us. We see how the wealthy have enough food and clothes for survival, and yet they remain disturbed and unsatisfied. They see someone else with a better house, better clothes, a more lucrative job, and so there is no contentment. These desires can also be compared to an itch. When we have an itch, it creates an irresistible urge to scratch, but scratching does not solve the problem. There is relief for a while, and then the desire to scratch returns with greater force. Instead, if one tolerates the itch for some time, the urge to scratch dies down slowly. The same logic applies to desires as well. The mind and the senses throw up myriad wishes for happiness. As long as we are in the game of fulfilling them, they flare endlessly. However, when we learn to turn the mind away from material allurements and renounce the desires of the senses, we come in touch with the inner bliss of the soul. The Kathopanishad goes to the extent of saying that one who has renounced sensual desires becomes like God. When one eliminates all selfish desires from the heart, then the materially fettered Jivatma, soul, attains freedom from birth and death and becomes godlike in virtue. The godlike nature of the soul that is devoid of yearning is also stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam. That person who eradicates wants and becomes situated in a state of contentment becomes like God. The Bhagavad Gita also states 2.7.1 one who gives up all material desires and lives free from a sense of greed, proprietorship, and egoism attains perfect peace. Elimination of desire is also the focus of the Buddhist philosophy. The Four Noble Truths so strongly emphasized by Buddha are: first, there is misery in the world. Second, misery has a cause. Third, the cause of misery is desire. Fourth, if desire is eradicated, misery will be eradicated. The downward spiral beginning from the desired does not end merely with anger and greed. Let us see how far downhill it can take us. Anger destroys good judgment. We have seen how desire is like a two-edged sword. Its fulfillment leads to greed and its hindrance leads to anger. Once anger arises, it brings with it numerous other afflictions. Lord Krishna states, Bhagavad Gita 2.6.3. Anger leads to wheeling of judgment, which results in bewilderment of memory. When the memory is bewildered, the intellect gets destroyed, and when the intellect is destroyed, one is ruined. Anger clouds the intellect, just as the morning mist creates a hazy covering on sunlight. When the intellect is shrouded, it leads to bewilderment of memory. The person then forgets what is right and what is wrong and flows along with the surge of emotions. Bewilderment of memory results in destruction of the intellect. Since intellect is our internal guide, when it gets destroyed, one is ruined. In this manner, a host of mental afflictions arise from desire. Now let us look at the reverse of this. If we eradicate desire, greed will naturally disappear, and so will anger. In that case, none of the other sequential afflictions anger will arise. The mind will be mastered merely by the conquest of desire. If desire is the cause of all problems, let us see what is it that gives rise to desire. The malady of attachment. We all experience different desires. While reading this book, someone's mind may wander to tea, another's mind may start thinking of cricket, while yet another's mind may ramble towards her child. Why is it that the mind of individuals generates such dissimilar desires? What is causing this variety of cravings? One person desires prestige to the extent that he is willing to give 15 lectures a day to get elected. Another desires money to the extent that he neglects his family to earn it. The third desires his paramour and is willing to sacrifice all his wealth on her. Where does desire originate from? The answer is that when our mind is attached to something, we experience desire for it. The cause of desire is attachment. The mind is a frequent visitor to the things and people it is most devoted to. In other words, if one is attached to alcohol, the desire for alcohol comes frequently to the mind. If attached to cigarettes, then thoughts of the pleasure of smoking cigarettes continually flow in the mind, creating a craving for them. In this way, attachment leads to desire. This point may seem to go against common sense. It would seem logical to think that the intrinsic qualities of an object make us desire it. But this is really not the case. For example, alcohol has no attractive aroma. It is foul-smelling and obnoxious, and the very first time we taste it, we actually do not like it. Yet, the same foul smell is so enticing to an alcoholic that when he passes by the pub, he begins swaying. The odor of alcohol, which makes one want to vomit, sparks the other's craving. The difference is due to attachment. The alcoholic's craving is coming from his attachment to alcohol. Here is another example. Is the smoke from cigarettes pleasant or filthy? You may say it's awful. It makes me want to turn around and go the other way. Then why is it so attractive to the addict? Because of his own attachment to it. It is not the intrinsic property of the cigarettes, but the attachment within the addict's mind that creates a craving for them. Let me repeat this for emphasis. It is our attachment to an object, not its intrinsic properties, which create desire for it. Let me cite yet another example. A mother lost her child in a fair. She went to a police booth and filed a complaint about her missing child. The policeman said, "Mother, 4 Lost and found children have been brought to our booth. See which of these kids is yours. The mother looked at all of them and responded, "None of these is my child." "But you saw such beautiful children," said the policeman. "Why don't you pick any of them and hug her with maternal affection? Why are you hankering for your child alone?" The mother replied, "Mr. Policeman, you will never understand the heart of a mother. I will only be able to sleep after I see my little child." The mother does not want beauty. She wants her child, to whom her mind is attached. Thus, the cause of desire is determined. It is attachment. The full link is now clear. If we harbor attachment, it will lead to desire. From desire will arise anger and greed. From anger will arise subsequent afflictions like illusion. Conversely, if we can eliminate attachment, there will be no scope for desire, and all subsequent afflictions will automatically cease. This brings us to the million-dollar question: what is the cause of attachment? The next section explains it. The impact of repetitive thinking. Not everyone's mind is attached to the same thing. Someone is so committed to golf that his wife is practically a golf widow. The other is so attached to his wife that he spends all his money on pleasing her. The third is so devoted to money that he has no time to spend with his family. We all have different attachments. Let us try to understand their source. When our mind repeatedly revises the thought, "There is happiness in this object or person," our mind develops attachment to that object or person. For example, in a class, many boys and girls interact innocuously with each other. One day, one boy notices something about a girl and starts thinking, "I would be very happy if she were mine." As he continuously repeats this thought, his mind becomes attached to her. He tells his friends that he is madly in love with her, and he is unable to study because his mind repeatedly thinks about her. His friends ridicule him that they all interact with her in class, but none of them is crazy about her. Why is he losing his sleep and ruining his grades thinking of her? The reason is that he repeatedly contemplated happiness in the girl, and as a result, his mind became attached to her. Consider a second example illustrating how attachment develops. How does one become attached to alcohol? There is no one who says in the beginning itself, "Get me the bottle. I cannot live without it." Rather, on the first day, alcohol tastes awful and people force themselves to drink it. Nevertheless, their friends convince them. We all get great pleasure from whiskey. Drink and enjoy life. Ill-advised by others, a person thinks, "My friends are loving it. I will too." He tries a drink and gets a tiny kick from the inebriation of the brain. The person begins contemplating happiness in the feeling of mental lightness. The more he consumes alcohol, the more he contemplates happiness in it, and the deeper the attachment grows until finally he becomes an alcoholic. Then the same person who had forced himself to drink on the first day now says, "I do not care about my family. Let my business get ruined. Never mind if my liver is spoiled, but give me the 5th peg of vodka. I cannot live without it. I cannot live without it." How did this transformation take place? It was his own repeated thinking of happiness in alcohol that led to the addiction. Now the full link is clear. This chain of causation is also stated in the Bhagavad Gita. 2.62. By repeated contemplation of happiness in the objects of the senses, one develops attachment to them. Attachment creates desire, and from desire arises anger. Why we all seek happiness? We have seen how the chain of mental afflictions begins with the contemplation of happiness. Let us now come to the last link in this chain. Why do we seek happiness? We try to find it in our family, work, hobbies, activities, and in everything else we do. Yet it eludes us. Even after so many disappointments, why do we not stop seeking happiness? The Vedas state, know God to be the nature of bliss. The Supreme Lord is an infinite ocean of divine bliss, and we souls are His fragmental parts. By nature, each part is spontaneously attracted towards its source. A lump of mud is a part of the earth and is pulled towards it by the force of gravity. A river is created by water vapor arising from the sea, and it flows back into the sea. Similarly, we souls are little drops of the ocean of infinite happiness, and hence our natural propensity is to seek bliss. Until we get the infinite happiness of God, we will not be content. In other words, until the part, our tiny soul, attains the whole, the Supreme Soul, we will not stop our quest for happiness. Somewhere or the other, we will contemplate bliss, and once that happens, the whole chain of attachment, desire, anger, and greed will naturally follow. We have understood that to seek bliss in our inherent nature, we cannot change it. How then can we rise above these mental afflictions? The solution to this problem is actually very simple. Replace lower attachments with higher ones. The urge of happiness is as natural to the soul as thirst is to the physical body. It is impossible to think, I will not contemplate happiness anywhere. The simple solution then is to envision happiness in beneficial things. Cultivate virtuous desires such as the desire for inner growth, austerity, service, and sacrifice. For example, if we repeatedly think that happiness is in becoming wise, we will become attached to good knowledge. This will lead to the yearning to gather more knowledge. The desire for knowledge, which is good, will not bind us, rather it will uplift us. Similarly, if we contemplate happiness in good health, we will become devoted to it. This will make us crave wellness for ourselves. Such desire will only help us become healthier. The same principle can be used to develop love for the Supreme. If we repeatedly think that happiness is in the Supreme Divine Lord, we will become attached to Him. The mind will then hanker for the Supreme Lord. The Srimad Bhagavatam states, you repeatedly thought of the pleasures in the objects of the senses and became attached to them. Now frequently think that God is the ocean of infinite bliss, and you will develop devotion towards Him. The process is the same. We only need to change the direction. Saint Ramakrishna Paramhansa expressed this principle very eloquently when he said, devotion is love for the highest, and the lowest shall fall away by itself. The great saints in history were not free from desire. Instead, their desire was millions of times stronger than ours. The only difference was that while we desired the world, they desired to love the Lord with all their heart and serve Him with their every act. Attachment to the Supreme does not spoil the mind like material attachment. Rather, it purifies the mind. God is all pure, and when we attach our mind to Him, it gets cleansed. The Bhagavad Gita states, "Those who attach their minds to me with unadulterated devotion rise above the three modes of material nature and attain the level of the Supreme Brahman." While material desires bind the soul, noble desires uplift us. Where does that leave anger and greed? Make anger your friend. We have seen that desire leads to anger and greed. The desire for noble things is no exception to this rule. When it is not fulfilled, the devotee also feels anger. The key is to channel this anger in the proper direction. Thus, in the Ramayana, a devotee of Lord Ram says, "O Lord Ram, how heartless I am that, without your devotion, I still continue to live." When anger is directed constructively, it propels us more rapidly on the upward path. If we become angry at ourselves for the lack of improvement, we strive to try harder. We refuse to compromise and prod our mind forward and upward. In this way, by channeling anger in the proper manner, we can make it our friend. Make greed your friend. We have learned that the fulfillment of desire leads to greed. Similarly, sublime desires lead to divine greed. The devotee yearns for more devotion, more divine knowledge, and more service. Such greed is very helpful since it keeps one hungry for further progress. In this fashion, a devotee says, "O Sitaram, I pray that my loving devotion at your feet may increase day and night." This is sublime greed, which is no longer detrimental. Instead, it elevates one to even greater spiritual heights. What about envy? Like the rest, if it is properly oriented, it becomes helpful. When we see others ahead of us in spiritual growth, we should think, "She began attending J.K. Yoga's life transformation programs along with me. She has progressed so rapidly and developed such immense patience and tolerance. Why am I left behind? I too must try harder for self-improvement." Make pride your friend. The biggest of all material defects is pride, which is extremely difficult to overcome. People become scholars of the scriptures and masters of austerity and yet remain full of pride. Once again, the ego can be neutralized easily by dovetailing it towards the Supreme. Expressing this sentiment, Hanuman says, "May this pride never leave me, that my master is the great Lord Ram, and I am the servant of such a great master." Pride in the Lord strengthens faith and enthusiasm for devotion. We have seen how all the mental afflictions, the worst enemies within, become our best friends when they are properly directed. This is powerful information for changing ourselves. Now, for internal transformation to be permanent and not fleeting, we must tap into the power of habits. How do we dismantle old habits and develop beneficial ones? Let us discuss how we can install great habits within ourselves. Summary of the main points. Like physical diseases, there are also afflictions of the mind. Anger, greed, desire, envy, and pride, among other human failings, are all mental afflictions. They are far more impactful than bodily ailments. Anger does not come by itself. It is caused when we harbor a desire and its fulfillment is obstructed. Desire is such a disease that it can never be satiated. The more we fulfill it, the more it gets inflamed. Hence, greed comes from the station of desire. Desire arises out of attachment to objects or people. Attachment happens when we repeatedly contemplate happiness somewhere. It is impossible for the soul not to contemplate happiness. The ocean of happiness is God Himself, and since the soul is a part of God, it naturally seeks happiness. The solution then is to seek happiness in the proper direction. Repeated contemplation of happiness in God will lead to attachment to Him. This will result in dovetailing desires in the direction of God. Since God is all pure, desire for Him does not degrade the mind. Rather, it becomes purified in devotion to Him.